I said it was a home stretch before, but I was lying. But now it's really the home stretch.
Thank you.
It's our final panel. So let's all come back in the room and have a seat. We have a great group of people here on the stage. So I'm going to do my best to absent myself very quickly. I'm just going to introduce the moderator of this panel. Tom Lovejoy is volunteered to moderate the panel. We were very grateful and pleased that he did that. Tom is currently at George Mason University, and he's a member of our external advisory board, again, so you can see a theme here with many of the people on the stage are people that have helped us a lot with SOGIS over the years, and Tom certainly falls in that category. I could take the whole panel's time trying to list all the stuff that Tom's done, but he's he's one of the real fathers of the whole concept of biodiversity, and many of the issues that we just dealt with have been at the forefront of his consciousness for a long time. He's also a great science communicator. He's a winner of the Blue Planet Prize, and we're just grateful that he's chosen to be involved with our school, and he's going to moderate this panel, and I'm going to let him introduce the panelists themselves. But this is our final panel of the day, and thank you once again for attending. And Tom, I'm turning it over to you.
Thank you very much. So just to clarify, I once got introduced as the father of biodiversity, and I said, that's not biologically possible. So I believe in the shortest possible introductions, because what we really want to do is hear from our panel. And we start at the end there with Kim Jordan, a very successful woman in business, a member of the Board of Governors. Tony Frank, the Chancellor himself. Diana, our intrepid leader. And we have no church present, but we certainly have state and Governor Ritter. So Bob just really set the stage so well for this panel, laying out what the challenges are going ahead for sustainability and environment at the global scale. So I'd like to start actually by asking Tony, tell us a little bit about how you came to create SOGIS.
Well, I would, microphones, amazing things. I'd resist that characterization, for one thing. I think SOGIS came out of the work of a lot of people on this campus. If it had a theme to the derivation, and Diana can argue with me if she disagrees with this, it would be a persistent and sustained pattern of near total failure to get people to work together around issues related to the environment. We had tremendous expertise in a lot of different areas related to the environment. We still do. But starting in 2000, when I was then the vice president for research, we had tried all sorts of different things to bring groups together. Excuse me. We had tried to bribe groups together, which is a tried and true academic success technique. And we actually had resources to do it. And when that failed, I began to despair that we were ever going to be able to pull a group together. The bully pulpit had failed. We had done no shortage of panels, commissions, reports. And in the end, it seemed to me that, and I think a lot of us, that what offered us the best chance to succeed was to set up an organization that gave people a place to come together, if they were willing, to build coalitions of the willing that would work on the topic. And if we had it headed by a scientist, not only of a great note in her own right, but someone who was known for fostering collaboration across disciplines, that gave us the best chance to go forward. And President Larry Penley at the time, when we pitched that idea to him, Larry agreed with that approach, and we were able to convince Diana to be the inaugural director of the school. And in some ways, time is a funny thing. it seems like that was just yesterday in some ways, and seems far longer than 10 years ago in others.
That's great. Well, I think one of the really genius elements in the structure that was created was setting it essentially apart and above. And we've just done exactly that same thing, creating a sustainable Institute for a Sustainable Earth at George Mason. Because only if it is sort of above can you actually connect with everything with no prejudice involved. So Diana, I would love to hear from you why you allowed yourself to be persuaded to do this.
I think it was the tried and true, what were you saying, bravery type thing. That actually, though, I think there was a time, and I agree with Tony, we had a lot of panels and commissions or cross-environmental. We were trying to bring a number of colleges together on issues that were similar, and it was very frustrating, but it also got people interested across colleges. And I think it was just at that time, I don't know exactly what report it was, I wasn't on it, but there was one that came out that was essentially a task force report with a number of faculty, some deans on it, and they pushed very strongly for having something that was formal, a formal structure. They didn't define it, but they certainly gave it a strategic plan, and there are a number of people in the audience who were there when that happened. And I think that was the real catalyst, that it was both bottom-up and top-down of a number of people who are saying, we are really experts at CSU in a number of different areas, and we are already translating our knowledge into action. And I think CSU was a leader at that time. We were among the first to say we're going to take the step up and work across all these disciplines. So that's kind of the background on it.
So the richness of this university in terms of knowledge and perspectives and interest in sustainability is really quite extraordinary. And I think it has clearly grown since SOGIS was created. And so you came to SOGIS, right?
I was housed next to SOGIS, kind of under, I guess, I don't know. Yes, I was inside of SOGIS for a while.
We considered you part of it.
Yes. And then I went to the Energy Institute Center there. But yes, I came first with SOGIS.
So that was a good place good entry place?
Yes, it was.
Great. And Kim, you've had a really interesting career actually practicing sustainability in the for-profit sector, which often gets left out of a lot of the discussions that go on in academia. So I think you have been a especially important addition to the advisory board. But I'd love your perspectives on what SOGIS means to you.
Yeah, I was sitting here trying to think of when I got off the board because I got on the Board of Governors. So I can't, Peter and Diana probably remember better than I do. I was on with Maggie as well. I must say, as a business person, as a governor now, I see how much success and progress has been made in terms of working collaboratively. That was my first experience looking at academia, and I was surprised. Maggie and I would sit next to one another and go, really? What? That it, faculty lines and, how does a student taking a course, who gets paid for that, and all of those nuts and bolts that if you're not inside the university, they're mysterious. And one of the fundamental tenets of modern best business practices is to not work in silos. And so, and to work collaboratively and across different disciplines to the best outcome. And my belief, and I think you guys have really been successful at this, was that students would really benefit from a program that not only worked on sustainability, which was such a great current focus in the cultural landscape, but also modeled the way for that collaboration across disciplines. So it was really an eye-opener to, and it's nice to see Maggie here today, to have that experience in that way.
So I have to
I
say,
think I was bossy,
I've
probably.
truly enjoyed my time sitting next to Maggie on various occasions. It's always lively.
Yeah.
So
We were maybe a bad combo to sit right next to one another, but we enjoyed it, so.
I think whoever's sitting back by Maggie, it's a bad combo.
Yeah.
So I think it's so important, the perspective that you bring to this topic, because 70% of the world's economic product is in the private sector. And if it's not part of the solution, there will be no solution. So having that when you're on the advisory board directly, but also indirectly now through the Board of Governors, I think is really essential in the end. So in an earlier panel, I asked sort of a teaser question for each of the panelists to pick what they thought was their best story having to explain sustainability or sustainability science. And I'm going to ask each of you to do that, but I will tell mine.
Okay.
So I was at a wine tasting dinner in New York City, and a whole bunch of people around the table enjoying wine who didn't really know each other, so we went around explaining what we did, and I explained what I did. And the person next to me was some Wall Street hotshot, and he said, "Oh, well, that's interesting, but how in a world with the internet and stuff like that, how does that make any difference?" And I just said, you can't eat the internet. So sometimes you just have to go for it. But you have a favorite story about explaining sustainability or sustainability science?
It probably flows from just the work that I do. So my center was with SOGIS, and then I moved out because we're closer to kind of the energy folks. We do energy policy. And I was with a group of CEOs about a year ago from utilities around the West. So the West is pretty heavy in fossil fuels, particularly 10 years ago. And our center mapped out that 90% of all the coal is going to be gone in less than 20 years in the West. And we had a lot of people that didn't believe that when we presented it, whatever. So we just asked the CEOs, and the CEOs said, yeah, that's right. So we have a really narrow slice of the pie on sustainability. It's greenhouse gases, matters a lot, but it is part of the pie. And to have the major CEOs of the utility sector agreeing with something that nobody would have thought possible 10 years ago gives me this ray of hope that maybe, if we can move that sector, we can move other sectors, and if we can move them rapidly, we have some chance of doing the kinds of things our previous presenter talked about in terms of a 1.5 degree scenario. And so that's, it's like sustainability is this broad concept. We were talking about this, I'm on the board with you and Maggie of SOGIS, and it's just such a broad thing to try and define sustainability. It's in the eye of the beholder, so I've chosen the little part of the pie that's about greenhouse gas emissions from the industrial sector, the built environment, transportation, and the utility sector. And some of it around the world, but really have that's my little focus, and other people have other things. And if you have utility CEOs saying, yeah, you're right, 95%'s gone in 20 years, then that's getting to the place of being
That's great.
far more sustainable.
That's great. So Diana, do you have a particularly favorite story?
I don't know if it's a particular, maybe it's kind of a 10 years ago versus now. And I think that one of the things that was kind of striking to, well, it was just striking to me. I don't know when other scientists got it. Maybe it was a wake-up call. But we're so used to seeing science and saying, aha, for 3 decades we've been, or maybe longer, we have been putting the science forward that's about all these global challenges we just heard Bob talk about. we've really provided the science. Science has done a lot for us. And then, kind of like the next step was science brought together, how do we understand, the social, human well-being and the actual science. And then all of a sudden we're sitting on a stage that I think maybe 10 years ago we wouldn't have been, where we have somebody who's worked in government and pursued, and we've got somebody in business who's, no matter what I'm doing sustainable, making my effort. We've had some administration from the top. And I don't know that, we're not going to make progress on sustainability unless there's collaboration. And so it's kind of this wake-up call for me that I've seen with this 10 years that it was all about science, and we're ringing the alarm bell. Science is showing the alarm bell, but that's not enough. It has to be this collaboration.
Need solutions. Tony?
So we have this project going on in Denver, a redevelopment of the National Western Center, which is a fairly large project, and CSU's facilities there are focused on the interface of food, water, energy, the environment, health. I think very much the sweet spot for land-grant universities, and certainly the main issue, as you just heard from Bob's talk as well. And early on in that process, we were doing a visioning session and trying to get, as you might guess, in a situation like that, we had very diverse groups of people. People who, their common ground on climate science might have been that there were vowels in the words. There wasn't a lot of common ground beyond that. And what I was trying to do at that visioning session was to just get people to get past the original cost of entry and enter into a dialogue and talk about what might be possible. And so, as I'm prone to do sometimes, I tried to use a little humor around it, and I started out by saying, we have some observations we're going to make about climate science, about the climate. We used to call these facts before we gave up on them, but we talked about land temperature and water temperature and ice thickness and measurements over time. And then I said, and out of those observations, which, they're just not debatable, that they're just observations that are, we come to a series of questions. Do we understand this? What's the role of humans in it? What can we do about it? And you could just see the audience start to get a little restrictive in their body language. We're going to have these arguments, and many of you know that I'm a baseball fan, and this was immediately after the Chicago Cubs had won the World Series for the first time in over a century. And so I said, but what comes out of all of those, the most important question is whether the Cubs winning the World Series will impact climate change. And as a scientist, the answer is we don't know. There's not enough data.
Great.
And it got kind of a similar laugh, and I rapidly moved on to a different part of the talk. And we actually did have some good conversations.
So, Kim, what's your favorite?
You told that story only because you wanted to remind us that they did win, right?
Yeah.
I would just sort of add on to Tom's and Diana's comments that, one, the problems are so big that it takes business, governance, academia, citizens, religion, to bring everyone together to tackle this. And I think that's been a lot of our motivation at New Belgium. And in part of that, too, beer is an attractor for people to a point. And I think we've recognized that we could tell a story about our practice in a way that was interesting and compelling for people and maybe motivated some small number of people to think a little bit differently than they'd thought before. And so, I think we need to, there's lots of data to suggest that this is wildly dire. And I think in order to bring along the people who go like this when you talk about it, we have to figure out some other way to bring them into the conversation. And one of those ways, I'm not suggesting that it's beer per se, but a positive message, a hopeful example that people might choose. That's why I speak a lot in business schools, because I want students to be thinking about when they go out into the world, what kinds of choices can they make that will impact what happens next.
So I'm at a university, George Mason, the president of which is Angel Cabrera, who's a big proponent of sustainability and business and management schools internationally. So we've had 10 really important years. We've had the scenario of the job to be addressed. So I just love, and I think I'd start with Diana, what might be some of the priorities that you would have looking forward to another 10 years?
We just talked about this at our external advisory board meeting, and I don't know if I'll put them in the same priorities that you guys did. But I do think that there's some things that, if I was the czar, or czaress, whatever they call them, of the world. Tsarina, okay. If I was the czarina of the world, I do think that there is a time that every student would have as part of their core curriculum, which I know we're moving to, that they have a sustainability 101, or maybe 2 semesters of it, where we take, like we're already doing, and I'm not saying that this isn't done in other colleges too. There's a lot of sustainability going on in each college. But I really feel that you can't be a graduate in this global world anymore unless you know all these problems, say, pick a problem, and then put all the factors around it and the trade-offs and how it brings in the people that we're talking about on the stage. The business, what does it mean to the people that live near the creek? What does it mean to, the newspaper guy and the public? And then, what are the trade-offs globally? We seem to think in our niche, but we may not think that what we're doing has effects on climate and land and air elsewhere. So that'd be the first thing, is you don't get out of here unless you all have a course in learning about sustainability and collaboration and moving forward and looking for these solutions. And I think the next thing is more of what we do at the school, which is creating an atmosphere where people can come in and have creative ideas and research. And some of them bomb, and some of them don't bomb. But we're at least putting trust in the people to come together and play in the intellectual playpen of what is needed for these solutions in the future.
I think you remember this morning. There was a discussion about incoming freshmen at CSU. We admit more Colorado students than any other university in Colorado as freshmen. And 8 out of 10 have as one of their top concerns sustainability. And so while the supply side is kind of what an external advisory board can sometimes pay attention to, knowing the demand side is really an important part of the equation, and the demand is absolutely there. So I think I would line up with what Diana's saying about the kinds of things, doing more than what we do. And I would just add to that, describing the problem. Sustainability can be a lot about describing the problem and too little about the hope. And what I would like to do for 18 and 19-year-olds coming to Colorado State University would be to give them both sides of the equation, that there's actually a problem that exists that's existential, but there's a hopeful side to it that they could be a part of, and that I think SOJUS is like this core that we could rely upon to provide both of those kinds of things, the problem description, the solution part of it, and really a sense about how students, without enlisting them as activists and the normal sense of the word, can become involved in solving things.
Yeah, I think the solutions orientation is a really important one. So, Kim, do you have some suggestions?
I like the idea of being czarina for starters. You were
on the board.
Yeah, I could ask for that title, Governor Czarina. I think something like a czar or czarina at the executive level, one of the things that occurs to me is the National Western Center. I feel like I raise my hand and say, hey, you know, it's really great that we're working on, you know, we have some partners coming on in the agriculture space, and that's really exciting. And I want to hear more about where the focus, because I think for two reasons. One, our planet depends on us, and two, our demand side says, I might want to be a farmer, but I might want to do it in a different kind of way. And I'm really thankful for people who are stepping up to underwrite that. And I want us to be brave enough to also say, so how are we going to holistically address this issue? And I think a czar could perhaps, in various pockets across the university, help with that, perhaps.
So Tony, I'll ask you for your perspective on this, but sort of as a prefatory remark. You know, we think of Colorado State as one of the famous land-grant universities. We think of it in Colorado, but it's actually an international university. So the opportunity space for sustainability internationally is tremendous. Anyway, that's my comment. You can add what you wish.
So I'm going to answer from the perspective of what I think the university's priorities around this ought to be, not SOJA's. I wouldn't presume to tell SOJA's what to do, but I think there are some things that have to be important priorities for the university, for SOJA's to be successful in its next 10 years. And one of those is, am I really going to sit here on this stage and say this in public like it's a revelation? Apparently. I think we have to defend the space for science. I think that science is very much under attack in some public ways and in some non-public ways. And I think unless we are careful and rigorous and outspoken in our defense of that, we run the risk of science falling into a list of other belief sets, which I think does a tremendous disservice. I think it's antithetical to the foundation that we built a university upon. And I don't think it is going to be a trivial expectation for the university to retain that commitment and make that a priority and create an environment in which places like the Center for the New Energy Economy, the School of Global Environmental Sustainability, any variety of places and organizations that work at the interface of science and policy and solutions can continue to work in an environment that's not under attack. So I think that's probably one of the university's top priorities. I think the second and last priority that I would say for the university is to not get in the way and screw up the students that are coming in. This next generation of students, as Bill alluded to, they're there. They're ahead of us on the issues. Their response to our discussions around the environment. One of the things I really like about this generation is that they're not overly interested in what we think. You know, I'm really, you know, their responses to our discussions about the environment remind me very much of their attitudes toward our debates around gay marriage. Let us know when you're all done being weird about that, because we're past it. We've moved on. And that's the way they are around the environment as well. We have a President's Council on Sustainability commission, and we have 3 presidential commissions on campus. One's around sustainability, and you know, many people think we set those things up to sort of provide direction. The Council on Sustainability is there almost solely from my perspective, so that someone is capturing all the tremendous work that's being done by students, by our staff members, the change that's going on just around in how everything from housing and dining, alternative transportation. Stacy's here. I know that Carol, I'm not sure if Tony Miyamoto is still here as well, but the amount of work that gets done across this campus, not because we mandated it top down, but because it's just happening, is astonishing. And I think one of the other key priorities of the university is to recognize that that culture's there, it's happening, and not screw it up. It's a takeoff on, you know, the medical oath that those of us who are in that profession swore, do no harm.
It's great. So I don't know how we would manage it microphone-wise, but I think it would be really nice to give the audience an opportunity to ask some questions. Sure. Why don't you just come and pick up Kim's mic, and then we'll pass that one around and take care of each other.
So I think it's fabulous, the things that are going on here at CSU related to sustainability. But I'm Jane Doe citizen living in suburbia, and I want to know, how can I contribute? And what I also want to know is, how are we going to recruit all the millions of other Jane and John Does that may or may not be aware of this and may have an interest or not in being able to contribute to better sustainability, but don't have the first clue as to how. What are your approaches for outreach to the citizens of Colorado and the United States?
No, and I can say that because it's my 10-year anniversary.
Who wants to answer?
I might start with, so I have a bias about this, which is that carbon mitigation, renewable, you know, when I look at the triage of if things are going sideways in a hurry, what do we need to do first? It would be in that area. So one of the things further telling you about my bias that bugs me is I recycle. You know, I recycle, which is, like, in the scheme of what we really need to do, pretty much nothing, especially when you consider that it's kind of dubious that anything that we're recycling is actually getting recycled. So I think we could start with talking about energy issue. I mean, voting as an informed citizen, advocating for policy. I kind of alluded to this earlier, but personally, I think one of the hardest things that each of us can do as citizens is to speak up in a way that's not, that's at least somewhat informed and, you know, with grace, just to make sure that we're not letting the conversation, I fear a little that the conversation, except in pockets where, like this, where it's intensely, we're intensely devoted to it, that the conversation is kind of withering because the cultural zeitgeist right now would suggest you're some kind of tree-hugging weirdo if you say that, you know, that this matters. So there are a couple of suggestions. Vote with good knowledge, advocate for policy, and speak to your neighbors about things that you might be doing. Riding a bike now and again instead of getting in a car, you know, waiting to drive somewhere until, you know, some of those basic things that we've heard over and over. Advocating for the electrification of the transportation grid. There are a lot of things that we can all put our shoulder to the wheel for.
And I might put a little bit of a finer point on that because I agree completely with that. But right now in Colorado, New Mexico, and Nevada, there are these three big important conversations that have to do with policy. And you know, when there's a battle over a gun law, you know, if we're debating gun laws, hundreds of people show up at the legislature. And it's a citizen legislature where people get to testify, get a sign up, and maybe if it's 100 people, then you only get 2 minutes. But adding a voice to that, adding your voice to that when it's about climate, when it's about climate science or climate change. We have a big carbon bill that's been introduced now, just right across the desk in the House. To show up there and add your voice to that is actually a very concrete way to say, I'm a part of this conversation. And I think we're maybe past the point where people look at folks who do that as tree huggers. It's becoming a far more mainstream thing, but it is not nothing to be a part of that down at the state capitol or in city halls around Colorado. It matters.
And I'll put in a plug for a lot of the things that the city of Fort Collins is doing around this regard. We have, I think, a very, very strong relationship between the university and the city, and a lot of the people that are here today who work on issues of sustainability on campus are actually liaisons with the city or work on it at the city level. The city has had a very enlightened view of how to deal with sustainability. I mean, if you look at going back all the way to Fort Zed and the smart energy grid, there aren't many municipalities that would have said to their university, you want to play with our electric grid? Sure, well, go ahead, let's see how that works. And the city of Fort Collins was willing to let us try that, and as a result, we've had a lot of great successes.
Great story. Thanks.
In the next 10 years, how are we going to deal with this idea that we are now entering the Anthropocene epoch, when we're going to re-engineer the planet to serve us better?
So I have a very different take on the Anthropocene, which is I will only be happy with the name Anthropocene when it means that we have gotten control of ourselves, right? That we are actually collectively advancing a sustainability agenda. Not managing the planet, but managing ourselves for a better planet and support of people.
So I have this general rule of thumb of never answering questions that are asked by the person who is in the best position to answer them. I got over that largely in my PhD defense. For those of you who don't know, Holmes Ralston is a university distinguished professor here at CSU, often referred to as the father of environmental ethics. And I would love to hear your answer to that question.
May we?
Well, I do think that in the next 10, 20 years, the environments we live in will be increasingly synthetic, built, rebuilt. But I would like to say increasingly symbiotic, the synthesis between humans and the natural world. I would like to think that humans, who are in some sense the only species that's a threat to the future of the planet, can be educated to think of itself as a caretaker of this wonderland planet. Put that into your educational system so that no student gets out of here without thinking about living on a wonderland planet. Or shortly, a good planet is hard to find.
And that's so true.
Thank you.
the land grant mission is over a century old. The SOJS is only 10 years old. And we've seen an evolution in the land grant mission from being production-oriented and being ag and sort of mechanical engineering to looking at broader issues of society. I think, how would you see SOJS being a model of transforming the land grant university and how it operates, and way of looking at the future generation? We're in the 21st century, and I think SOJS provides a model of integration, of system synthesis, of looking at problems and solutions in a very novel way. And can we construct a university to actually mimic that model?
So Diana, you may want to comment as or Tony, but it seems to me that what you're suggesting is that SOJS act as a catalytic surface for the entire community. Oh, please.
I think that's what you were saying. And I think that, knowing academia the way I do, and Tony can comment on this, but I think it would take a lot of us saying, when we are considering this new land-granted institution of the future and engagement and how we engage, whether it's from extension all the way across the campus, how do we fit in this level of interaction or facilitate appointments across the campus so that they could work on similar problems? You can do it now from department to department, but how can we facilitate it so it's easier? Is that kind of where you're going? You're not or are you talking at the student level?
I'm talking at the institutional level.
Okay, all right.
So, Dennis, I'll pick at words a little bit here. So I don't think the way the land-grant university, in a big picture sense, the way it functions has changed in 150 years. I think what's changed are the questions that are asked, the problems that are wrestled with, the people who wrestle with them. I mean, fundamentally, what we were established to do, that tripartite mission that we sometimes use as a throwaway line now, teaching, research, and service, we say it like it's all one word, and it means something to us. What's it mean to other people? But when you break that down and think about that a little bit, the idea that we have a responsibility to create new knowledge, to pass that knowledge on to the next generation who will build upon it, and to use it today, not someday, but today, in solutions that benefit the society that we exist to serve. That model is every bit as alive, I would argue with you, today as it was in 1862 when it was just a theory, when it left the pen of Abraham Lincoln on July 2nd. How that gets manifested, who does it, all those sorts of things have changed dramatically, and I think will continue to do so. And I think SOJS is a great example of a part of that. If we went back, well, let's go back a long way. Let's go back to when you and I were in school. The words were different, but the topic was the same. How do we get scientists to cross their disciplinary boundaries? How do we get people that we have trained and selected and rewarded for being reductionist, for being really good at a very, very small thing, to look up and work with each other and combine those incredibly powerful reductionist specialties into a collective that is much broader and capable of making a big difference? Over the years, we've had, how many times have we had the argument, oh, it's not multidisciplinary, it's interdisciplinary, and similar things that really numb the mind. But the fundamental underlying question that we wrestle with, that we've wrestled with since land-grant universities started, and that I suspect we will wrestle with 150 years from now with whatever the different problems will be about how we take our greatest asset, the people that make up the place and the incredible intellect of the human mind and that represents the students and the faculty and the people who are at an academic community like this, and how do we create an environment where it can assemble and do those three things, not just simultaneously, but synergistically.
Bill?
Yeah, I really agree with that, Tony, and maybe this is a more pedestrian way of thinking about it. I've always thought about the Morrell Act and land-grant universities being created to break down class stratification. And interestingly, around issues of sustainability and environmentalism, there's been a real sense on the part of a lot of people that it's really only for the elites. And I took environmental economics here at CSU in 1975. And it was a pretty niche group of people who were there and who were, like studying it and thinking about it at the time. And just even in my time as governor and looking at this problem, so many people thought that the things of the future that involve electric vehicles or solar energy or even the most basic kinds of things that are part of this transition we're in now were just for really wealthy people. And what I think about CSU's role as a land-grant university is to take apart that class stratification and to socialize the idea of this transition is something that's for everybody. And I think the fact that we admit these Colorado kids and people from all around the world, and we have this ability to offer them a view about sustainability that gives them, I think, a different kind of comprehension than maybe a decade ago, certainly different than 40 years ago. That's a really important part of this equation. This thing that we do to solve this cannot come out of elite circles or upper class circles. This has to be something that breaks down all the stratification and is class wide.
That's great. Diana?
Yeah, I just would like to add a little bit that we started off this afternoon with some early career scientists on a panel. And there were 4 of them. They're trained in our Sustainability Leadership Fellows Program. And they come from very different disciplines. They represented atmospheric science, biology, just what we're talking about. The thing that I think about, 2 things I recognized right away, and I think some other people did too, was 1, they didn't refer to sustainability. They referred to sustainability science, and they were very aware of what Tony had mentioned before. I hope my sustainability science will be credible. The second thing was, I didn't start out to be a sustainability scientist. And I'm using their terms. There was just a generational shift from what they already are thinking and what I'm thinking about how broad sustainability is, and we may have to have this lens or that lens to see it through. They were right on in not only acknowledging that, but when asked a question about how, with your varying backgrounds, did you see yourself getting into sustainability? Well, I didn't really, but now I see what I know and the breadth of it is going to interact with other people. And it was really refreshing to hear this push that crosses this land-grant institution.
So I think that's a great final statement for this panel. And I think we would just really want to all join in celebrating a fabulous 10 years and the decades to come. So